Je pense sans cesse à toi.
Hey there, drinkers, diners, and listeners. Catherine Cole here. Before we get started, I'd like to give a shout out to Blossom Brothers Botanical Wine Spritzers, which is sponsoring today's episode in celebration of the Four Tops 1-year anniversary. And if you haven't been listening for the past year, here's the scoop on our show. The Four Top is a roundtable discussion of today's hot button topics in food and beverage. In episode 28, we will be discussing why ethnic foods are not trendy, what makes Portland cool, and how much it royally sucks to be a woman in the culinary industry. We are not in the studios of OPB today because Feast Portland, the crazy fabulous festival presented by Bon Appetit magazine, is going on right now. So we are out in the field today recording this at Canavan, a gorgeous Spanish restaurant in Portland's Pearl District, with 3 rockstar panelists here today with us. We've got Khushbu Shah, senior food editor at Thrillist. So happy to have you here, Khushbu.
Thanks.
And Hillary Dixler Canavan, senior editor at Eater. Welcome, Hillary.
Thank you.
And Andrew Knowlton, deputy editor at Bon Appetit magazine, which is the sponsor of Feast, so it's a real honor to have you here. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks, Catherine. Great to be here.
So let's dig into our first topic, you guys. What are the implications of a food journalist or blogger deeming a dish like Vietnamese pho a trend? Khushbu Shah, you had an article in Thrillist early last month entitled "The Problem with Calling Ethnic Cuisine a Trend." So I'd like to kick off this conversation with you. I thought you framed that piece so brilliantly. To describe a historic culinary tradition is basically paradoxical. To describe that as like the latest thing, right?
Yeah, definitely. Sort of the biggest problem I've always seen with that is that it makes a culture feel sort of transient or ephemeral when they've been around. These foodways have been around for centuries, and people have been eating this way for centuries, if not longer. Take Filipino food, for example. It's a cuisine that's been deemed the next hot thing, like for the last 6-7 years, like straight, pretty much.
I think like in 2005, I'm guilty. I did that. I'm still waiting. No.
Yeah, and it is sort of like still, like still waiting in a way, but Filipino immigration has, happened in America since like the 1700s, and like there's been a number of stalwart Filipino restaurants that have been around for decades. And so to keep calling something a trend that's consumed by hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people around the world for years is sort of dismissive.
Oh, totally.
Yeah, and then it also raises questions for me about like who really profits from calling something like this a trend. In a way it is sort of good. It brings attention to a type of cuisine that, maybe, especially in America, like mainstream America, might not be familiar with. Like, I was talking to Nicole Ponseca, who owns a chef who owns a couple of really great Filipino restaurants in New York City. And she was saying it's been great in that it sort of helps fill seats, or people aren't as skeptical of they come in with a little more familiarity about what some of the dishes are. But at the same time, on the larger scale, is it really these sort of mom and pop restaurants owned by immigrants who are really getting the business and the attention? It like tends to be these sort of more trendy restaurants that are very media savvy. Their stuff is very Instagrammable. The chefs might have much better English, than some of these other chefs. They tend to be, white. And that's sometimes a little bit hard to see. I don't know. You track a lot of restaurant openings, Hillary, on Eater. Like, is that something that you also see, that a lot of these restaurants tend to be owned, they might be cooking foods of another culture, but they tend to be owned by someone who's not necessarily from that culture?
I think the restaurants that get grouped together in pieces that would declare Filipino food as the next big trend do tend to have some sort of peg to some sort of hot opening that maybe has a chef who's not of that culture or who is not steeped in that culture. And to me, one of the not great things about declaring some culture a trend is that it's just very lazy. I think it's lazy and boring. And I think it's far more interesting to say, like, this is a thing that's happening. Let's investigate deeper as to why.
Right.
Which is how at Eater we think about approaching trends generally, whether it's like soft serve, which my colleague Monica wrote about this week, or something like potentially like, why are we hearing about Filipino food now more than ever? I think it's absolutely appropriate to look for trends. Trends tell us things, patterns matter. But I do think framing is important, and I think being smart and not being lazy is important. And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, something at Bon Appetit, which us being a larger magazine, we have in the past been guilty of doing, covering those trends and it's like you said, Hillary, it's not covering the trends that's bad, even though I despise it now because I've been doing it for so long, and you say naming this. But I think you have to give the context. You have to explain what it is and why. We've had some hiccups at Bon Appetit recently. We had Pho-gate, as we call it, which we had a video of happened to be a white chef kind of telling people the correct way to eat pho. And that wasn't the chef's fault. That was on us, the way we labeled it, and we didn't give people a context for it. And that was on us. And we learned, we've been thinking a lot more about that at Bon Appetit. But, I think it's, we did a poke thing, and obviously poke is a thing. Like, for whatever reason, it's out there, and our job is to to chronicle that and tell that story. But we also have to do it by reaching out to perhaps a Hawaiian native and somebody who grew up with this, and let them tell the story through their eyes and not us. We like to think we're experts, but we're not experts in every single thing. So I think we've really personally looked inward to ourselves, and how are we going to cover these trends? How are we going to cover the international food scene? Why do we go to some restaurants and why don't we go to other ones? It's something that, I'm going to be honest, I didn't necessarily think about or put that much thought into it 10 years ago, but in the past 5 years ago, just whether it's the political state we're in or, food just becoming this thing, it's like I think about it all the time now. I'm very kind of reflective about it, and I do my best, and I'm not perfect at it, and it's hard do it. It's hard to, because I want to teach people about new cuisines that maybe they're a little bit hesitant to get into. And sometimes those restaurants are the more popular ones because they have a celebrity chef or something, and that gets them in the door. And I hope after they do get in the door, then they go find out for themselves and seek out, other places. But it's something we think about all the time. I think all of us think about it, especially now.
Yeah, and I don't find it burdensome to think about it.
Yeah.
Which I think is a point we'll come back to when we discuss some of the issues around like media bias and women. But I don't think not to repeat myself, but it's not burdensome to think about whether you're telling the best story. It's literally your job if you are a storyteller, journalist.
But the story doesn't just, you have to search for it, and you have to do your due diligence to find the best way to tell that story. That is our job, to find the way to best tell the story. And you're right, sometimes people are lazy and they take the easy way out, whether they're just, naming the top 5 Filipino restaurants in America, and you've got to take the time and have the knowledge to do that. I don't think it's a burden either, but it is something that I'm much more aware of now, and I feel that's good. That's a good thing, That's what the awareness is a great thing.
I think a lot of it comes down to sourcing again, like you were saying, like finding the right person to get the quotes from, or let them tell the story. And I think sourcing is where a lot of editors and writers get a little bit lazy, like you were saying, because you are on a time crunch, you are on a deadline, you also are in the middle of 8 or 9 or 10 other assignments, and you need to get a story out. So of course you go to the person that can give you a quote sometimes. Right. And I think it's something that we all just need to take a little more time to find the right person and coax those quotes out of them.
Well, Andrew, I was actually going to compliment Bon Appetit because I've noticed lately that you guys, when you use the term trend, it has to do with a technique. It's like, wood fire grilling or something like that. Mm-hmm. So techniques can be trends, but entire cultural traditions, just as Khushbu's article so clearly pointed out, are not trends. They're, they've been here for thousands of years. It's all about how you use that term, really.
Definitely. But I've also noticed that sometimes there is sort of cherry picking of things from other cultures. Like one ingredient will become really, quote unquote hot or trendy. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it can even be a technique. I feel like a lot of tandoor oven cooking has been sort of ripped from Indian culture, but frequently those are not also then linked back to their histories or the importance that they have in this other culture. I'm all about innovation. I think everyone should be borrowing from everyone.
Yeah, that pushes cuisine forward,
exactly.
right? I mean, it's, yeah.
And if you're not from another culture, that doesn't mean that or if you're not from a culture, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be cooking food from another culture, as long as you give it the time and the due diligence and the respect that it deserves. I feel like all of this, for me at least, always comes down to respect at the end of the day, like above everything else.
Right. And how that's the question though. How do you, there's that Portland story. I think I read it on Eater about the Kook's
the burrito cart
place here
yeah.
in Portland.
And that's cultural appropriation, which is almost a different conversation, but yeah.
Yeah, that place went out of business, right?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. But maybe we should retell that story because...
From what I remember, it was like two women from Portland who had gone on vacation in Mexico, and they had eaten these tortillas that were sort of transcendent to them. And they like went around like trying to get the recipe, and I think they mentioned in an interview that they were like creeping in windows of places, watching people make these tortillas because people wouldn't reveal their secrets to them. And then they came back and were like doing the same thing. So I think it's, again, a matter of respect. It's not
right.
that they shouldn't be allowed to open a burrito
Right.
cart and make tortillas that change their lives. It's just like you can't sort of take it from someone who doesn't want to give it to you.
It's intellectual property that you're stealing from somebody, basically going down there and doing a little R&D for the weekend, and then coming back and opening a burrito place.
Yeah, it like sort of makes me think about, for all the fun I have personally poked at Noma, Mexico, Rene put in the time. He hired tortilla makers. He didn't watch through a window and then say he was doing it himself. And I think that's an interesting contrast.
I think also another aspect of this is just the way media covers this topic and the verbiage they use. And I think one other point you had in your piece that I really enjoyed was just this sort of calling everything that's not white ethnic.
It's very othering in a way.
Yeah, it's
in America today, like it's not an other, it is very like there are large swaths of the population that are from non-white cultures,
And yet you see that a lot in food coverage and in wine media, which is sort of my realm. Oftentimes you'll see wine pairing notes that'll say goes well with Asian cuisines. It's like, what do you mean by
continent?
Yeah.
I mean,
That's a lot of ingredients and a lot of different dishes right there.
So yeah, I just really enjoyed that piece, Khushbu, because it kind of got people to. I hope it got people to stop and kind of question the terms they're using and the language they're using, and I think we all need to kind of explore each individual cuisine on its own merits, like you guys are saying.
The realization that people come from different places, they have different backgrounds, and so when you write about something, it's fair to write about something from your own perspective and your own background, because that's who you are, but also understanding that not all of us have that same background, that and to explain that and you do that through storytelling and hopefully your mastery of words and having enough time to do it in print is sometimes difficult, but I think realizing that while your experience is unique and special, it's certainly not the only one out there, and you need to realize that. And I think that's something that hopefully more people are becoming aware of. But
I think it's exciting to see audiences responding to when people get it right and when people get it wrong. I know people complain about like mob mentality on the internet, but I think it's really cool to see audiences galvanize around a food article getting something right or wrong.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think,
it means people care.
When I started, you didn't have that feedback, there was no comment sections because there's I guess I'm bedating myself. There was no internet, in 1999, it was small. But now it's like the minute you put something out there, you get reaction. And I think that's good because it kind of knocks people off their ivory tower that you have this position where you can just write whatever you want and people take it for what it is. But then you get people's reactions. I mean, that's amazing right then and there. And people call you out for stuff, and rightfully so when you do something that's irresponsible,
Well, I think it's a good time to take a little break. It's mid-afternoon. It's a good time for a wine spritzer, which is often what I make for myself in the afternoon when I'm staring at my laptop and need a little inspiration. Our sponsor today is also a feast sponsor. It's Blossom Brothers Botanical Infused Wine Spritzers. They are made from white wine, I think mostly Riesling from the Columbia Valley, aromatic white wine. And I think they only have 3 ingredients, wine, sparkling water, and wonderful botanical infusions from Europe. So we're just going to try some of them and see how they taste and see if they make us a little more eloquent as we get into the next 2 topics.
What flavors do we have?
We have, one of them is pink grapefruit and honeycomb, and then the next flavor is blood orange and ginger root.
That sounds good.
If I can get it open. And then the last flavor is white peach and jasmine flower.
My parents would be like, well, we had those back in the day. It was called, don't include this, it was called Bartles and James.
Well, no, it's okay to bring up Bartles and James. I think that's like a malt liquor, whatever. But
But it is a wine a beverage in a glass.
Yes. Well, I was speaking with one of the owners, Sean Bavaresco, and he was saying that he was kind of thinking of when he first discovered microbrews in the mid-'80s, and all he had before that was Budweiser. So he was like, you remember Bartles and James from high school. This is the grown-up version, only way better. So do you guys want to
remember Malibu from high school?
do you guys want to taste a different flavor?
Yeah, I'd like to.
I'm good.
I don't know what.
These bottles are really
You gotta
cute.
chug it, Hillary.
No, I don't.
Well, speaking of trends, I do think that the spritz is a trend that's been very hot the last few years. You see a lot of them in Europe, so I like that we have an American version now. And you can just buy it in a bottle. You don't even have to make it yourself.
Yeah, they're sort of the ideal day drinking drink too, because they're so they're a session drink.
Totally.
Yes, low octane, right?
Yeah. So you can have 4 and it's okay still.
But I have found that you still can get drunk off them if you drink enough.
Where
You will
there's
get
a will, there's a
intoxicated.
way. Yeah.
Well, I think it's time to move on to our second topic. We are recording this episode at Can Font, which is the second location in the world of a Barcelona-based restaurant led by Michelin-recognized chef Josep Vidal. So why is Can Font 2.0 in Portland, Oregon, of all places? The Australian third wave coffee company Proud Mary has 2 locations in Melbourne, but its third location is in Portland. Our luminaries today are here in town for Feast, the star-studded food festival. Andrew Knowlton, you are the top trend watcher at Bon Appetit, the sponsor of Feast. You're probably the top restaurant trend watcher in the United States. So I'm going to hand this over to you. Why are food watchers so interested in Portland?
Well, Portland I came to Portland maybe 15, 20 years ago, and it wasn't the food city it is now. I think the street cars, the pods as they call them here, have been really instrumental in introducing foods to people, and a lot of those allow people who normally wouldn't be able to open a brick and mortar restaurant, they can open it. A lot of them are, immigrants and introducing one dish or one food, and a lot of them have gone on to open brick and mortars. I think, Portland's a pretty inclusive place. It's somewhat homogenous when you're here, but it is pretty inclusive in terms of people willing to try new things. And I think it was a time and a place where this is kind of Never Land. It seems to me people don't really work in Portland that much. So hence all the
Don't
coffee.
tell anybody.
Yeah, don't tell anybody. With all the coffee shops and going out to eat all the time. I mean, you walk around Portland and it's a relatively small city, but there's tons of restaurants everywhere you go, and they're all packed. I was just out today walking around and had to go to 2 different places before I could get into one. So I think, people are interested in trying new foods, and Portland is seen that they've really kind of latched on to that, and it's become, a cool food scene that's not in its infancy anymore. It certainly needs to grow. I think sometimes Portland is a little too casual and a little sometimes flippant with their food, and kind of moves on to the next thing, and you hope that there are kind of those old school classic places. But I think for the past 5 or 6 years, it's every time you come out, there's something you're looking forward to trying and something interesting. So it's just kind of a natural thing.
What are you thinking, Hillary? I can see you're about to.
I know. I was having a thought. I think an interesting thing about these international brands coming to Portland is it makes me wonder about whether Portland as shorthand for something, I think about like Portlandia, and I think about when people say something is Portlandy, they mean there's a certain like DIY aesthetic, a hipness, a youngness, an edginess that I think if maybe you're an international brand, maybe you want to align yourself with. I also wonder for international brands coming to Portland if they see it as a lower risk way to test the waters in the American market.
Yeah.
Because from my understanding, although rents in Portland have been getting higher, they're nowhere close to New York or San Francisco or even probably LA.
Yeah. When I talked to, I talked to the furry people, which
yeah.
open the ramen shop, who have, I think, like a billion in Japan. Like, they're all over the place. And they opened a beautiful space here. And the owner said that exact thing was, we knew we had a built-in audience here, and we wanted to see if, we could test the waters, and see if Portland was a safe place, but at the same time interesting. So, yeah.
There's like also a Portland-Japan connection that's happening in the other direction as well. But yeah, and I think Portland really has come to mean something in American food culture too. And you see chefs like Chris Cosentino, like,
who opened Jack Rabbit here in Portland
after, kind of being exclusively in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Yeah.
And I think it's unusual and not a given that a chef from San Francisco would expand to Portland rather than LA or New York to keep building their brand.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know if we should be flattered or not.
Or terrified.
That we're like the second location now.
I think it's pretty good. I think a furry's strong. I mean, I think the one, I will say for most towns, though, that Portland is pretty good about, they like their local restaurants. Hillary, I don't know, if you've been to Nashville recently, but that's a town that's like booming right now. And you're getting so many people from New York and from San Francisco moving in, and it's kind of watering down the identity of the food there.
But there are also expansions happening in Nashville that have been really successful. Like Husk debuted in Charleston. Sean Brock's second Husk was in Nashville, and it's in many ways outpaced the original in terms of acclaim. And Butcher and Bee is expanding in Nashville, and by all accounts is putting in the effort. I don't think there's anything inherently inferior about a second location or a second location in another city.
Absolutely not. I do think what you were saying earlier about people coming to Portland because it represents something. I think people are, they want to go to places that are, they deem cool, and Nashville's cool. So everyone wants to open a restaurant in Nashville. For a while there, Portland was the place, or whether it was Charleston. But it's interesting how just a city becomes like, obviously Charleston was Sean Brock. I mean, he brought a lot of people in there. Obviously, there was a lot of people before Mike Lotta and all that. But in Nashville, you had Debbie. Can't remember her last name. Debbie. She had Flight, but she was kind of one of the only ones in town for a while. And then you get this influx of other chefs. So it's just interesting, So but my only point is that I think Portland has kind of resisted a lot of outside chefs coming in to some degree. I mean, maybe you get the imports, but they like their local, they're pretty true to their locals here.
Yeah, I love how loyal Portland is to like Portland brands. It's sort of amazing. Like every restaurant you go to carries like Stumptown or carries like Stephen Smith's Teas, like every single one, even if they're high end or like low end, or even if it's like a second location from a chef from a different city, they will still make sure to sort of carry these like very Portland brands, which is, it's cool to see. I feel like New York is a little more flippant about that kind of stuff. They care a little bit less about New York-based brands to a degree. There is some loyalty there, but I think New York just loves the new way more than it just needs constant change. Yeah, in a way that I feel like Portland doesn't need that as much.
I think that might tie into what you were saying, Hillary, about the whole DIY aesthetic here, because people come here because they don't have any money and they can't afford to live in New York or San Francisco. So they do start with a food cart, as Andrew was saying, and they don't have the money to open a brick and mortar location with a beautiful decor, professionally designed. They just get something from Goodwill and throw it on the wall, and they really do try to support each other. The same is true with our beverage industry, which is booming here as well. So, but I am also a little nervous that our time has passed. What do you guys think? I think keep hearing
has Portland peaked?
Has Portland peaked? Are we over?
No,
I don't think so. I think the way that New York will never be over, Chicago will never be over, LA will never be over. I don't think Portland will. I think
it only
over.
It gets better. The more chefs you have cultivating more talent, hopefully you'll get more diversity here. Yes. Different types of restaurants opening up.
By different types of people.
By different types of people. I mean, I think Portland's not over.
I think it makes me think a little bit about how Philadelphia has changed so much in recent years, and Philadelphia never had the like coolness that Portland.
No, it did not, did it? It did not.
You know that Portland has and was described with. But Philadelphia's restaurant culture has really blossomed and grown, and part of that is like chefs like Mike Solomonov. Their restaurant groups grow. Sous chefs become chefs de cuisine. Chefs de cuisine either get their own restaurant in the group or they go off on their own and open something else, and that's how it works. And that if that's what happens in Portland, like awesome, lucky Portland.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is, you hit the nail on the head in terms of why a city seems like it's having a moment is because of those incubators, those people. I mean, DC had that a few years ago. Now you get places like Bad Saint, which is one of my favorite restaurants, in the world right now.
I know, I'm like so excited about some of the new openings in DC coming this fall.
Which I was never excited about DC. No,
I feel like Detroit is also just starting to go through that too.
Right. And I think, it's that they say like artists are some of the first people to move into certain neighborhoods, and then slowly the restaurants and the bars come in. So restaurants are an indicator of a healthy, vibrant scene, hopefully of all levels, And I mean, that's one good thing that's happened in food. It has become somewhat more democratic, whereas restaurants affordable restaurants are getting just the same ingredients that used to be only for the high end places. I mean, I remember when I moved to New York, and if you wanted to go to have a special night out, it cost a lot of money, and there was a white tablecloth, and usually the maitre d' spoke French, and that's totally changed now. I mean, nobody goes out like that. Very few people go out like that anymore. There's such a range of places to go to. And I think people are more interested, and it's just more exciting. So I think every city just needs to grow that way a little bit more.
Yeah, I think it's happening.
Yeah.
I think like the work, it's like both Bon Appetit and Eater go really hard on tracking like anticipated openings.
Yes.
And like when you see what cities are what restaurants are rising to the top of your interest list, it's just such a cool mix of cities now, like Houston and sometimes Dallas. And
once in a while,
Dallas. But like DC and Detroit, and it's great.
Yeah.
I feel like this pushback against sort of fine dining has also helped that a lot, and it just gives people, they can, instead of spending $150 on one dinner, they can spend $50 on 3 different dinners and go out 3 nights of the week. And I feel like Portland especially has really embraced the like casual restaurant going.
Yeah, and also like from a practical perspective, you can't just show up and do fine dining in a city that doesn't have a robust fine dining culture, because who do you hire to work your front of house who has the experience to execute at the level that you're trying to achieve? And that's something that I've seen a lot. Speaking with people who have opened, tasting menu restaurants in smaller cities, there's a real question around staffing and working that out.
That's a whole other episode, isn't it? Staffing.
My bad.
No, staffing. Whenever I talk to chefs, that's all they was like, I can't find anybody. Do you know any chefs? I'm like, no, I don't. That's your
Inspire
job.
and train some.
Yeah.
Well, everyone in Portland's writing a novel, so the wait staffing's pretty easy here. There's a lot of folks in that industry. Well, now it's time to move on to our third course. It's a little bit heavier, but since we're drinking these delicious Blossom Brothers botanical spritzers, I think we're up for it. Women comprise more than 50% of the labor employed in food service, and yet according to an article published in Eater earlier this year, the restaurant industry is still a safe space for misogyny. Hillary Dixler, Canavan, you have been covering this for years. You've been editing pieces on this issue. So I'm going to throw this to you first. Why is the restaurant industry so far behind the curve in its treatment of female employees?
So I want to start by just saying I don't know how behind the curve it is. We ask a lot, where are women at the, where are the head chefs? Where are the women restaurant empire builders? But we also ask, where are the female CEOs? Where's our female president? So just want to get that out there. I think the 3 things that we've been thinking a lot about on Eater, and to focus it on America specifically when answering that question, is sexual harassment, paid leave, and then general bias. Bias tying into kind of what I was just ranting about. our editor-in-chief, Amanda Clute, reported out a phenomenal feature, and she titled it How to Escape the Restaurant Motherhood Trap, I believe. I'm like not looking at it. Now I'm like nervous I got her title wrong. But really what she explored was the potential impact of paid leave, like paid parental leave, that could have on closing the gender gap in the restaurant industry. And I found her argument really compelling. She found, let me get the statistic up so it's accurate. Per her reporting, only 4% of food service workers, and I apologize for reading, but we got to get it right. 4% of food service workers, roughly 490,000 of the 12.3 million individuals employed in the field, get any sort of paid family leave. Wow. And it's the fundamental fact of womanhood is that you might want to get or become pregnant. And without paid leave, it just becomes really hard to come back. So I think that's a huge part of the answer to why are there not more women at the top. There is a documented pervasive culture of sexual harassment in the restaurant industry. One finding that Eater and a bunch of other outlets picked up was when they're known as ROC or ROC, Restaurant Opportunities Center United, kind of had this like bombshell 2014 report in which they found that 90% of female restaurant workers that they polled faced sexual harassment from customers, and then just under 70% had experienced sexual harassment from coworkers.
Lovely.
Yeah. And actually, back when that report came out, I spoke with Teo Reyes, who is the research director there. And one of the things he and I talked about then was like tipping, that a culture in which your wage is dependent on tips puts all workers, perhaps especially women, or statistically especially women, at risk for abuse. And then you couple that with, in the essay that you were quoting by Jen Ag, what she describes as a safe space for misogyny and kitchen culture. If you're a woman, why would you stay? You're being, like, why?
You're being grabbed in the kitchen.
You're being grabbed and insulted, and you're not seeing equal opportunities for advancement. So I think those are big factors in that. And then that third piece that I mentioned and started with was bias. And I do think that's on everyone to investigate and interrogate in themselves. But when we see a restaurant by a male chef, do we ascribe to genius what a woman would be ascribed to as luck or hard work? Are women artistic? Are women creative? How do we talk about food that a female chef has created? Is it homey and nurturing? Is it actually homey and nurturing, or was it just made by a woman? So I think that's on food media and in the way that we position women and the way we write about them. But I also think it's like cultural as well.
Totally. And I feel like it shows up in restaurant culture, even in the smallest ways that people don't really think about. Like, I'm currently reporting out this story about how there's finally companies that are making chefs' clothing for women. Like, for the longest time, women just had to sort of get their own, get men's chef's coats tailored, but that costs money, which you might not have if you work in the restaurant industry, which is a notoriously low-paying industry. So how are you supposed to be respected as like the leader of a kitchen or in a kitchen if you have to show up to work in like ill-fitting, baggy clothes? Like, no one is automatically going to look at you and be like, yes, you're the person that runs this. And it's only just starting to happen that there's companies that are like finally addressing this. That women's bodies are, genetic, they just inherently tend to be a little bit different than, male bodies. And especially a kitchen job, too, is so physically demanding that your clothes need to fit you for you to be the best at your job. And it sucks if that's just one of the many hurdles that you have to, overcome to be able to succeed.
Yeah, I mean, I just think, like you said, restaurants are a microcosm of society also, and all of that stuff that happens. And it's just, it has to come down to whoever's running. If we're talking about specifically about the kitchen life, if you're running a kitchen, there has to be a zero tolerance of that. First of all, with the sexual harassment, because that's just, ridiculous and uncalled for. And then, paid leave, those are just rights that people deserve. And, just from my perspective, I think the best restaurants are the ones that are the most diverse, and they're also the ones that are at least from looking on from the outside in, are the happiest, where people are getting along. That there's both men and women working in the kitchen. Those are the ones that I would say they're more interesting. But it just, that's the way it should be. It should represent society and what has happened. And I don't know if we've gotten any further along in the past couple of years. I mean, at least we're having conversations about it now, which is part of is bringing it. But the whole macho chef thing, I don't want to call anybody out, but that's the shit that kind of has to stop. That's not cool. Even if it's from one male chef to another male chef, it's the hazing thing isn't going to fly.
I think the increasing professionalization of restaurants as a viable career will benefit women eventually.
Yeah.
There is no reason that for your restaurant to thrive, you need to yell and scream and throw things and grab people.
No.
You just don't. That shouldn't happen at work. And I think the move in that direction is happening, and I think that's good for literally everybody. I think whether there's been change in the past few years, I think Andrew is right. I think the biggest change is that people are talking about it, and they're expecting more of the media. They're expecting more of restaurant groups. And that, it's that expression about like voting with your dollar. But if this is something that really matters to you, and you read about a restaurant where maybe there was some distressing, repeat cases of sexual harassment, stop going there.
Right. And I've, frankly, have not written about a few restaurants after having hung out in that kitchen and seen what goes on. And I think sometimes chefs try to show off and think that that's, even some chefs that we all, love their food, the old trick of the chef crouching down, even if they have an open kitchen, crouching down and like hitting somebody with the back of a knife or something like while they're cooking and all that. And, you just have to, the media has to like not support those people and not write about those people. And, that whether it's, you're talking about NFL football or you're talking about a kitchen, like that stuff can't happen anymore. It's 2017. 2017, of course. But, but that needs to be an emphasis for all of us. Bon Appetit is not necessarily the place that's going to write a huge profile about that, but that's where Eater can do those large format pieces and then my job is to not write about those places that don't jibe. It's
something that Danny Meyer had talked about as part of with Union Square Cafe, way back when. The idea of I'm only going to buy the best green market ingredients and people are going to pay a little more for it. I think when he went to a no-tip model for Union Square Hospitality Group, he talked about the same idea of I want people to pay a little more to know that we're treating our employees correctly, and I'm so here for it. I am ready to pay more if it means that women are advancing and getting paid leave, and that cooks aren't possibly physically assaulted for making a mistake. I'm willing to pay up for that if that's the barrier.
I mean, imagine that happening, the assaulting anybody, no matter what the gender is or whoever they are, at Eater or at Bon Appetit or at Thrillist or wherever.
It's unacceptable.
No.
It's unacceptable.
And then when it does happen, somebody hopefully gets fired or, thrown in jail.
I wonder if it's also the nature of the industry, something about food being so popular right now. And in some industries, if you work in them, I remember newspapers back in the day, you would be given the sense that you were so lucky to have this job that you should just put up with a lot of bullshit. And, restaurants are so hot right now. I get the feeling that some kitchens, there's just that atmosphere that, you should feel blessed to even have walked in the door. So you should be putting up with this crap. What do you guys think?
That's sort of true, but at the same time, because restaurants are so hot right now, if a place isn't treating you right, there's another kitchen that is also just as hot that would frequently take you in. I've talked to some chefs too who are running very positive kitchens that are still having a hard time keeping staff, even though they're paying $19 an hour. People have 2 days off, they have vacation, they have health insurance, and yet they're still finding line cooks who leave just because there's so many, restaurants that are so popular in some of these major cities.
Yeah, I would assume that feeling that you're describing of I'm lucky to be here and I can't make waves is probably still true in the very rarefied small world of like 2 and 3 star Michelin, world's 50 best restaurants, where it's like, it's this cocoon and there aren't that many restaurants like it. So you don't want to get like, what's it called? Like blacklisted as a troublemaker by one chef who's going to tell the next chef that this kid quit on me and don't hire him.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes some of the places we're talking about, or I'm thinking in my head, are like that's 0.01% of the restaurants that are out there. I mean, you're talking about the chain restaurants and the fast casual restaurants. That they're part of it too. It's not just the celebrity chef-driven places. It's Chili's and, well, I don't know name names, but
Applebee's,
Red Lobster.
Let's move on to dessert. Hopefully not dessert at Applebee's. My dessert today is bittersweet. I'm just going to go first and get it over with. As we record this today, the Eagle Creek fire is raging in the Columbia River Gorge, and it's absolutely heartbreaking for those of us who live in Portland. We were all showered with ash last week. It was awful. We're still fighting that fire as well as the Archer Mountain fire across the river in Washington, and we have a new fire today at the Indian Creek Trailhead. Woohoo!
Oh, wow.
Anyway, that gets me thinking about wine. Back in 2002, we had some awful fires in the gorge and in southern Oregon, and the interesting thing was that vintage was super interesting in that the wines from those regions had these like campfire aromas to them. One winemaker I talked to said it smelled like a Hawaiian luau or prosciutto. Another one said it smelled like lapsang souchong. So we had some really interesting effects in just how the grapes tasted from these wildfires. So I don't know. I mean, I think obviously these wildfires are awful. They're making our lives miserable here, but it is sort of interesting how what's going on in the atmosphere can affect what is going into your body. I don't know. It's kind of an interesting thing to think about. Khushbu?
Sure. Mine's sort of nostalgic. I grew up extremely obsessed with 3D Doritos. Not the kind that looks like it's printed with a 3D computer that they like brought back, but the really puffy ones. They were on the market very briefly, but they were sheer joy in elementary school for me.
That sounds amazing.
They were, I think, discontinued in the 90s, which really, like the late 90s, which really sucked. But I was recently in Mexico City, and I discovered that Doritos makes some 3D Doritos still, but in international markets.
Nice.
Handful of international markets. So I made everyone stop in this mercado while I bought enough 3D Dorito bags to fill up my backpack.
Can I ask you a question about Doritos?
Sure.
Have you had the new ones, the cool heat ones, that they're cool at the beginning and then you taste them and they get hot at the end, like kind of trail up?
I have not had that, but I love Flavor Science.
I was like, I'm not a Dorito eater, but then I started and I was like, this is fascinating, you know? It's like Willy Wonka. It changes in your, Anyway.
That's awesome. But 3D Doritos forever. Please bring them back.
How about you, Hillary?
My dessert is the memoir Hunger by Roxane Gay. I read it a few months ago. It's a few months old. She describes it as a memoir of her body. And as such, there's quite a bit about food and eating. And the reason I brought it as my dessert, besides the fact that this memoir is like incredible and everybody should read it, is that I think if you are very into food and very into restaurants, it's really worth interrogating your attitudes about bodies, about your own body, about other people's body. That's where the food goes. And this memoir is really challenging, and it covers some very heavy, dark material, but it's also witty and humorous, and I think a really great entry point if those topics are maybe unfamiliar to you, or if they're not unfamiliar, it's also fantastic. So Hunger by Roxane Gay.
I love Roxane Gay. That's a great book. Thanks. And Andrew, what do you have for us?
So my school just started in New York, and I have two daughters, Julep, who I might have named after a cocktail, and Signa, which is Norwegian. But my ritual is, because I come home late sometimes from work, is breakfast is my time to make my daughter's breakfast. And I always try to make them all these kinds of, omelets, or introduce them to kind of making porridge the night before, so it's ready to go. But the only thing they will eat is this Norwegian brown cheese called yaost, which is brown cheese. You've probably seen it. You can buy it at Whole Foods. It's called Ski Queen. Comes in a little block. And it's like caramelized goat cheese, and you slice it with those cheese slicers. It's the only reason to use a cheese slicer. But my wife is Norwegian, and it's just so funny to me growing up, because I grew up when my mom would always make me pimento cheese. I'm from the South. And here I am, this like Southern kid living in New York City, married to a Norwegian wife, making breakfast for my 2 daughters, and I'm serving brown cheese. So if you haven't had brown cheese, you should try it.
And you're one of those New York people whose kids will eat anything.
That is not true. No. There's plenty of fish sticks and chicken nuggets in my house. Trust me.
Oh, okay. I feel better. Well, thank you to all you guys for being here. Thank you, Andrew Knowlton, for all you do for Portland and for bringing Feast here. We're just so honored to have Bon Appetit here, and we hope you continue to include our restaurants on your 50 best lists.
Thank you, Catherine.
Hillary Dixler, I want to bring up a concept that I've only seen a couple of times in Eater, but I kind of want to see it more. It's called Shop the Restaurant. Because I saw it a couple times and I realized what I want in my home is I want my home to look like a restaurant. So can I just make a special request that you do more of those?
Thank you. I like my column too.
And Khushbu Shah, everyone should follow you on Twitter because your feed is hilarious. So folks, she is at Kush and OJ on Twitter. Thank you to Blossom Brothers for sponsoring our anniversary episode, which was recorded in the high-fiber, protein-packed city of Portland, Oregon, at the beautiful Ken Font restaurant in the Pearl District. You can read all about us on the OPB website. Our producer is Alex Ward. Special thanks to OPB sound supervisor Stephen Cray for letting us steal his equipment today, and our theme music was performed by the incomparable wine importer Kermit Lynch. If you like our James Beard Award-winning show, please help us out. Rate us on iTunes, subscribe to The Four Top on your favorite podcast app, and please tell your friends about us. You can tweet us at @4top, all one word, or visit our Facebook page and post your thoughts about the show. We would love to hear from you. Bye-bye now.
Nuit blanche, nuit blanche, nuit blanche.
Eliminate tipping?